Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Lecture 2 for History 121, the Introduction to Western Civilization course. A couple of announcements. I'm still waiting on my textbook. I'd like to thank the publishers for a very slow postal service use. So we're still a little bit behind on that. I have read some emails from people stating that you're also having problems with the textbook. Again, don't worry. This is something that will be addressed before the first exam, and we will move the first exam if we have to. The textbook is more important for the exam at this point than it is for lectures and the material that I'm posting. Keep that in mind. So today, what I want to do, I want to get us back on pace. I want to deal with some course content and material today. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to take this opportunity now to please fire up the attached PowerPoint presentation called The Rise of Humanity. This will be our first major lecture for the semester, and we'll use this point to discuss essentially the rise of Homo sapiens and the rise of the beginnings of human culture. You really can't have a discussion of humanity without discussing where humanity comes from, how we develop, etc. So I'll go ahead and give you a couple of minutes. If you can please fire up the PowerPoint presentation called The Rise of Humanity that will be posted under the Content tab on D2L. And while we do that, I'll just go ahead and get started. That should have been enough time, or you could actually pause the video, bring it up, etc. So here we go. All right, slide 1 is obviously the title slide, The Rise of Humanity. Essentially the creation moment to the domestication moment. Please keep that in mind, and we're going to discuss creation ideologies actually right away. When was the world created? What do we know about the history of the earth? According to Bishop Ussher, a English bishop from the 18th century who had a very deep curiosity, he wanted to answer this question. He took the Bible, took the New Testament, took the Old Testament, and obviously if you take the New Testament, year 0 is the year that Christ was born. And he then took all of the events and the births and the begats from the Old Testament, and he then calculated out that the earth was created on October 23rd, 4004 BCE. For our course, BCE means before the Common Era. And by the way, that was a Sunday. It's an early morning creation. I want to say he came up with around 6 a.m. I'm not going to hold you to the time. Just keep that in mind. That's one creation myth for how the world came to be. It's going on to number 3, the next slide. Creation myths come from all sorts of cultures. They come from all sorts of backgrounds based on how we understand or forming how we understand the world around us. If you go to slide 4, the Judeo-Christian and Islamic traditions essentially all create the same, or all have the same concept of a creation moment. They all base their creation in Genesis, the first book of the Old Testament, or the Torah. In the Jewish tradition, all 3 of these religions, which shape the modern world, are based in the early beliefs of a prophet named Abraham and his interactions with the one single God that identified himself to him, supposedly, in the deserts of an area of the Middle East called the Levant. And we'll be speaking a little bit more about the Levant later on today. In the tradition, the creation myth, according to these 3 religions, is essentially the same. God created everything from nothing in a period of 7 days. The first humans were Adam and Eve. Where we get into an argument is the status of a man named Jesus, who is listed in the Christian New Testament as a savior. He is seen as a prophet in the Islamic tradition, and his divinity is rejected, though, in the Jewish and the Islamic traditions as opposed to Christian tradition. These three Abrahamic faiths all share that same creation model, that Adam and Eve, where Adam was the first human. Out of his loneliness was created Eve. They populated a place called Eden, which was a garden. Because of their sinful behavior, they were removed from the garden and then sent out into the world to live as other people would live. If we go to slide 5, in the Han Chinese tradition for the creation mythology, Chinese creation mythology says that there was a vague and amorphous material. It's almost unidentifiable. You can't really define it. This vague material gave forth the great beginning, which created emptiness. Emptiness created the universe. The light portion of the universe became the heavens. The solid portions of the universe became the earth. This is best represented by the Chinese concept of the yin and yang, which we see here on the slide. Beings came into being without being created. And I'm not going to put that many more beings in the same sentence again. Again, things just were. They just became. This is Chinese creation myth. If you go to slide 6, are we extraterrestrial? And I know you're all going to chuckle or roll your eyes at this, but there are people that believe that all life on this planet came from another planet, came from Mars, came from some far distant galaxy, that we were seeded here. That we either... Some people believe that we were seeded here as apes. Some people believe that we came here as germs, single-celled organisms that traveled here on a comet or a meteorite. And then life just sprang from that through the primordial ooze and the very best conditions that were available to us at the time. That is honestly just as valid a creation myth as the creation myths put forward by modern religion. If we look to number 7, slide 7, there are common denominators with all of these creation myths. Essentially, Earth was created by an external divine force or essence, that God or gods either created the Earth and humans. Some African traditions believed that the gods came to this planet and assumed human form in order to begin humanity. None of these creation myths ever conceived of the evolution of humans from apes. Humans came into existence fully formed at one single moment, with the exception of the UFO belief, one of the subsets of UFO beliefs for the beginning of life. Everything spontaneously sprung to life and populated the world. No tradition on the planet generally conceived that creatures evolved into new kinds of life. No society or religious tradition, therefore, was prepared for the revelation that humans are related to apes. And this will be controversial for some people, but we have to base history on evidence. We have to base a history on facts. And so we will be using scientific evidence that supports a theory of creation called biological evolution. So to get into that, the universe is 13.7 billion years old. Scientists know this because they have been able to use several factors in order to measure and quantify the age of not just our planet, but the planets around us, the universe around us. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old. As far as we know, the earliest life forms on Earth began to exist 3.8 billion years ago, and we are still looking for evidence as to how they came about. African apes appeared about 23 million years ago. Hominids, a type of ape that walks on two legs, appeared about 23 million years ago. Or pardon me, about 6 or 7 million years ago. My apologies. Hominids appeared in three distinct groups: gorillas, chimpanzees, and humans. These are historical facts. Now, one thing I will say about historical facts is that they can change. We can find new evidence from time to time that expands our worldview or expands the knowledge that we have of the world around us. There has been some recent discussion and talk about exactly how long hominids have been on the planet, and there may be some evidence that hominids have been around longer than what I've just said. Or I can post this afternoon, and tomorrow morning a scientist is going to come out with new information that will completely blow away everything that I say with new scientific facts. Science and history evolve all the time. That's going to be one of our overarching themes. Our understanding of the world through history and science changes. And so what I've just stated for evolutionary adaptation may change as well. Essentially, if we go to slide 9, everything that I've discussed is based on a creation theory that says that humanity and the hominid precursors to humanity arose in an area of Africa on the eastern coast near Ethiopia, Tanzania, etc. The out of Africa theory argues that all humans are descendants of relatively recent migrants from a small region of Africa who left there about 200,000 years ago. Some people argue that the world's races evolved separately in different regions up to 1 million years after migrating out of Africa, and that we can no longer be considered African. Genetically, there is no difference in humans based on Africanness or Europeanness or South Americanness. We all have the same genetic makeups. We all come out of Africa. According to these people who do not believe the African hypothesis, diverse geographic settings cause distinct physical and cultural differences. Essentially, as I've said now a couple of times, the out of Africa theory and our modern understanding of the world around us is based on the concepts of evolution. Evolution does not mean that a hominid common ancestor with the monkeys developed into humans and therefore humans sprang out of the apes. What it means is that we are scientifically, genetically related to a group of hominids that share common ancestors, and at some point, because of the surroundings around us, we began to have different adaptations to the world around us that allowed our species to succeed while other species died off. Evolution is a process by which species of plants and animals change and develop over generations, as certain traits are favored in reproduction. The process of evolution is driven by a mechanism called natural selection, in which members of a species with certain randomly occurring traits that are useful for environmental or other reasons survive and reproduce with greater success than those without the traits. If a palatable food grows higher in a tree and shorter members of the species are unable to climb or to reach that food in some manner, taller creatures or creatures that can climb will get that food. They will survive, as opposed to species that cannot get that food on their own, as an example. Biological evolution does not imply progress to higher forms of life, only successful adaptation to environmental surroundings. Also, keep in mind that as we discuss in this lecture various bits of evidence pertaining to the adaptation or differentiation of species, the dates that I'm giving today are based on radiocarbon and potassium argon methods of dating, both based on changing chemical structures of objects over time, as well as the look scientists measuring and using DNA. Again, some of these issues change. Radiocarbon dating may not be as potentially accurate in some areas as potassium argon dating. There have been arguments over the last couple of decades about that. So just keep in mind that science and its effect on our understanding of history changes. All right. So let's go to slide 10 real quick. Again, evolution equals adaptation. We're basing our evidence on archaeology and anthropology, the study of bones, the study of historic artifacts. People are going to say, well, we don't have that exact link, that exact proof of that switch from our hominid ancestor to a Homo sapien developing ancestor. You're right. There are still missing links in this chain. For some people, Bigfoot is possibly this missing link. If Bigfoot exists, he appears to be a hominid. He has characteristics as described that make him sound like a proto-hominid. He has other characteristics that make him almost sound human. All we know is that we have more questions than answers. And as long as that continues, and as long as science continues to look for those answers, our understanding of the topic will continue to change. Slide number 11. The oldest record that we have on hand right now for the development of Homo sapiens comes out of the area mapped on slide 11, talking about the discovery of Homo sapiens. The oldest Homo sapien fossils that we know about are 160,000 years old. Earlier suggested that this is earlier than what other studies had suggested. Homo sapiens, or modern humans, originated in a small region of eastern Africa about 200,000 years ago. They migrated out of Africa less than 100,000 years ago. On the scope of global history, geological history, we're pretty new to the ballgame. All humans share a recent common heritage, and the differences are mainly cultural. And that's why that will be fleshed out a little bit more as the semester goes on, and we talk about the development of European civilization and culture. Slide 12 gives us a list of the precursors of humanity. I'm not going to go over all of slide 12. The timeline is there for you to take a look at, as well as the scientific names. We essentially have 6 distinct species that scientists know of. The key trait to these 6 species, none of which are human, is their adaptability. Most early hominids died out. There is no direct genetic line to modern humans in the hominids on that list. However, these hominids provide us information about our ancestors. The oldest one on that list is Australopithecus afarensis, On slide 13, this is Lucy. Lucy is the oldest known fossilized human precursor, hominid ancestor, that we know of, discovered to date. She was discovered in the Awash Valley in North Africa in 1974. We do not have a complete skeleton of Lucy. However, we have, as you can see in the image, a fair bit of her. We have a good portion of the skull, the upper arms. We can reconstruct what Lucy looked like from these bones. We can use scientific extrapolation. And if you go to slide 14, this is what scientists believe that Lucy looked like. She is one of the earliest hominid ancestors we have that walked upright, that behaved in a familiar manner and is the beginning of our development into Homo sapiens. Now, why did some early hominids die and why did some develop new traits? Pardon me, I've lost my camera for a moment. All right. To be honest, I've used the term before several times. It's adaptability. Lucy survived because she was able to escape predators more easily. Lucy and her type survived because they were able to find food more easily. They were able to work within the environment that they had and make themselves adapt to what they had. Also, we have evidence from early footsteps, the shape of the pelvis, etc., that occasionally Lucy and other hominids were able to walk upright. This is called bipedalism. They use their arms and hands for other things while moving themselves continuously and away from hostile environments. At the most simple look at bipedalism, you can walk and carry things at the same time. Congratulations, you've adapted to your environment. If there is rain, you can take an armful of food, move to a rock shelter, and you therefore can stay dry. By staying dry, you potentially don't get sick. You've developed some form of logic. You have stored food now. This is adaptability explained at its easiest. Lucy and other common hominids had opposable thumbs. They had cognitive skills. There are examples of social organization where some members of the species perhaps had leadership roles. I'm talking very rudimentary. This isn't elected officials. We're talking about someone being a leader because they made better choices. Someone telling others to get out of the way of the giant saber-toothed killing machine. These attributes all distinguish hominids from other animals. They communicated via gestures. They may have developed early language. We don't know that because obviously there are no recordings from that time period. And from there, once you have language, once you have communication, you have culture, you have rules, customs, and identities. All right, moving forward. What distinguished early hominids from the first truly human beings? This is on slide 16. Is it brain size? Is it the ability to fashion tools? Is it bipedalism exclusively? Not all scholars and scientists agree, and the diversity of hominid ancestors continues to fuel this debate. To be honest, we don't know why Homo sapiens survived and other species died out. But we're going to go over some other examples real quick. On slide 17, Homo habilis, or skillful man. Skillful man was discovered by Mary and Louis Leakey at Olduvai Gorge in East Africa in the 50s. Homo habilis has a much larger brain case. They have elongated foreheads. They have a smaller jaw. And there's evidence of tool making as well as evidence of passing that knowledge along generationally. It's not like we find one sharp rock that's used for 300 years. We have evidence of Homo habilis, or skillful man, having the skills to recreate generationally those sharp tools. So here's a species that died off. They could teach other generations. They could make tools. They had a larger brain. They died. They didn't survive. Homo erectus, or standing man, emerged 1.8 million years ago. Homo erectus, again, has a very large brain capacity. He truly walked upright in a very recognizable human manner. If you look at the skull, that's very close to a modern human skull. The brow ridge is different. The eyes are slightly different. But again, Beyond those cosmetic pieces, that is a recognizable skull. Homo erectus made rudimentary attempts to control their environment, especially fire. They understood warmth. They understood the use of fire for cooking food, for keeping away predators. That happens as early as 500,000 years ago. They also traveled long distances due to bipedalism. When you move on all fours, or when you move in a crouched position, if you look at how chimpanzees move, for example, you cannot move as far, as quickly, as easily moving in that crouched, four-limbed position as a man or a human can on two legs. They also exhibited a family dynamic. One possible reason that Homo erectus may have passed out of existence, their heads were too large to easily give birth through the female's pelvic region. Their pelvises were only big enough to deliver an infant with a cranial capacity about the third of the size of an adult. As a result, offspring required a long period of protection by adults as they matured and their brain size tripled. Their brain wasn't fully formed at birth. Their heads grew. You're saying, hey, why doesn't that... Who cares? That's what happens now. Yes, that is what happens now. It takes a long time for us to be able to sit up, eat on our own, make noises that an older specimen of our species easily understands as a form of communication. We need to be nurtured, and that takes a very long period of time. That may itself have been a factor in the dying out of Homo erectus. We don't know. If we go to slides 19 and 20, what we see here are Java Man on 19 and Peking Man on 20. What we are showing by these is their ability to long distance travel. Java is in Indonesia. Peking is in China. We have scientific evidence of Homo erectus in these regions outside of Africa, showing their ability to travel. So this was the species that left Africa and dispersed itself into the world. Slide 21. Okay, so we've all heard of Neanderthals. We have the Neanderthal caveman commercial from Geico. Maybe I'm too old. I shouldn't be saying that example now. Are Neanderthals the missing link between Homo erectus and Homo sapiens? No. There is no direct link. Neanderthals were discovered in the 1850s in Germany. They have very large brains. They fashioned tools. They buried their dead. They lived in shelters. They're a very advanced hominid, but they are not immediate predecessors to modern humans. As a matter of fact, they existed at the same time as modern humans, and there is some DNA evidence that they interbred with us. How they came to an end, why Homo sapiens evolved over Neanderthals, we don't know. It's all still a scientific mystery. We do know that, as I said, that they interbred with us, that there are still people walking around with Neanderthal DNA in them. But for some reason, the two species could not coexist. Which brings us to slide 22, Homo sapiens, or the wise man. Homo sapiens displayed cognitive skills. They have the ability that we can tell from our structural makeup, from our skeletons, our musculoskeletal design. We can make linguistic or oral language expression. We developed approximately 200,000 years ago. We began moving out of Africa 120,000 years ago. By 25,000 years ago, DNA analysis reveals that all genetic cousins to Homo sapiens were extinct, and Homo sapien was the dominant hominid on the planet, and we is us. All right? I'm obviously using a little bit of joking language there, but by 25,000 years ago, we, the Homo sapiens, came to dominate the hominid world, and all of our other close genetic ancestors were extinct and dead. All right, map 23. So wherever you go, there you are. This is a map of our understanding of the diaspora from Africa by our Homo sapien ancestors and a rough timeline. Again, our information may change. We may find other examples in the future or even the near future disputing these facts. Very recently, there was an archaeological find in Alaska, thanks to the melting of the permafrost, of a human ancestor with a slightly different DNA pattern than what we were expecting, which means that isn't a direct Homo sapiens. We have evidence of other hominids migrating into North America. What that means for the overall scientific understanding of the human species, we still don't know. But again, it's a great example of science changing every day. So, slide 24. What makes us human? We've developed. We're no longer some proto-hominid. We're not living in Africa anymore. We're not throwing sticks. We're not being chased by saber-toothed tigers. But beyond that, what makes us human? Is it culture, language, our ability to fashion tools, our ability to support life and support a family? Is it our cognition, our ability to understand the world around us? Yes. But what's interesting is all of these factors can also be attributed to other animals on the planet. There is evidence that other animals have language and communicate with each other. Chimpanzees can use tools, as can other species of animals. Prairie dogs live in villages for mutual support and protection. Other species of animals give us examples of all of these traits. For some reason, humans portray all of them at once in the same species. Language, however, is the key. Our language developed beyond just simple chirrups and grunts and rudimentary noises into the blabber that I'm giving you now. This sets us apart from other animals and is one of the things that makes us distinctly human. But there are other intangible items as well that make us humans. They're not as perhaps easy to quantify. On slide 25, art makes us human. The ability to recreate the world that we see through various media, be it paint. This is an example from Altamira, Spain, 35,000 years ago. An early human painted bulls on this cave wall to describe a hunt. Maybe you have a magic ceremony to bring bulls in to the hunt. On slide 26, this is the cave system at Lascaux, France. It's approximately the same age. It is not something that you can go and tour anymore due to even the presence of humidity degrading the artwork. But as you can see, we have depictions of animals, we have depictions of humans and symbols. It's a record of the hunt. It's a magic ceremony. It's a communications means done by some early human that said, I know that this rock rubs red on a wall and I'm going to make a red cow to describe what I've seen. We also have the ability to make sculpture, as seen in slide 27. These are Venus sculptures found from various areas in Eastern Europe. They're between 25 and 30,000 years old. These are considered to be some of the world's earliest fertility symbols. This is what makes us human. On slide 28, the ability to make music and musical instruments makes us human. For entertainment, for communication, for sorrow, for joy. We make art in all of its forms. If you go to slide 29, there will be a link provided on the slide. I can't play it for you now. The very first languages that we can extrapolate probably sound like what the San Bushmen of Africa sound like even to this today. It is a series of clicks that they make while they speak, and you can click on the YouTube link for an example of that. From those clicks, from that very rudimentary manipulation of the tongue and the teeth, we have developed into 19 different language groups around the world. That's amazing. All right. We've developed humanity. We've developed the hominid. We've talked about the rise of Homo sapiens as opposed to the other hominids. One thing we need to discuss in this first lecture is food production. And this will be our last... Food production and its effects will be our last major topic for today. The emergence of agriculture truly allows for the settlement of humanity and our ability to manipulate the world around us. Agricultural production emerged in many regions at different times. There are a variety of patterns that reflect local resources and conditions. Essentially, the Middle East, North America, South America, China, and Africa all developed settled agriculture at various times, roughly around the same time area. I'll show you a map of that shortly. That allowed for the survival and success of humanity. Our first ancestors were hunter-gatherers. As I mentioned, the San of southern Africa give us a very proto-human language that we can listen to today. They are still hunters and gatherers. Essentially, a hunter-gatherer is exactly what it sounds like. They hunt for meat. They gather berries, edible seeds, leaves, and other means of feeding themselves from the world around them. They are migratory. They do not have enough generally on a day-to-day basis to survive. They need to constantly hunt in order to survive, in order to thrive. That limits family size. If you don't have a sure supply of food, you're not going to give birth to more children than you can feed. Slide 32 is perhaps the most famous European hunter-gatherer that we have ever yet run across evidence of. In 1991, Ötzi, as he came to be known, was discovered, and that's the picture on the left, emerging from a glacier on the Italian-Austrian border in the Alps. Essentially, the hikers that found him thought they'd found somebody who died in the last decade or so and had become frozen in the ice. As the ice melted, it became more and more apparent that this was not someone from the 20th century. This was somebody who was tens of thousands of years old. On the right, we have a modern reproduction of what Ötzi looked like, as well as reproductions of the items he carried with him. He carries birch bark containers. He has a woven reed mat to keep rain off. He wears furs. He has a bow and arrow. He has a metalworking axe. This is a Neolithic hunter-gatherer. Ötzi was not a farmer. He lived day to day, constantly searching for food. He's the world's oldest known murder victim. There was an arrow found in his back that directly led to his death. He's covered with hundreds of tattoos. So we have lots of clues of early European culture thanks to Ötzi, but he was not from a stable agricultural environment. He was a hunter-gatherer. Slide 34, this is a map that talks about the earliest food development sites that we know of in human history. Roughly 12,000 years ago is when we know that food was first thoroughly domesticated. What we're going to be most concerned with is the area on the northern part of the Saudi Arabian landmass. This is the Levant. This is going to be home to what we call the Fertile Crescent. It is where we get wheat, barley, cereal crops, chickpeas, peas, pistachios, dates. This is approximately 10,000 years ago. 4,000 years ago, we have asparagus, cabbage, grapes, and others developed in southeastern Europe and in Italy. But for all intents and purposes, for this course, the one area that we are most concerned about is delineated on slide 35, called the Fertile Crescent, and it's the first area where we see developed, settled, modern-style agriculture. Essentially, we have the domestication of plants and animals in this region that leads to a settled life. Early humans find seeds that they find that they can eat. They taste good. They provide nutrition. They grind these seeds up. They find that they can make an early form of bread out of them. They can make an early form of beer out of them. These are found free and wild. They then take these seeds and they say, hey, I have a little extra. I'm going to store these. And maybe some of these seeds get spilled and more plants grow the next year in that area. And they say, hey, that's the plant we like to eat. We have farming. 9,000 years ago, or pardon me, 9,000 BCE, there was abundant rainfall and mild winters in Southwest Asia that allowed humans to settle there and to discover these cereal crops that they could eat, that were nutritious, they were good tasting, and allowed the first establishment of humanity's first farmers. They pulled seeds directly from the plant that they were sowing, rather than those that had fallen from the stock. This style of agriculture ensured a food supply for the following year, following the harvest, as well as the ability to have seeds after that. Now keep in mind, however, plants were not the first items domesticated in the world. The first items domesticated and used for food were animals. The dog was domesticated in the Fertile Crescent region in northern Iraq about 14,000 years ago. Wild sheep and goats were domesticated soon after that in the mountains of southern Turkey. Dogs were used for a food supply. They were used for a supply of power to pull things. They were then used as a supply of protection, keeping wild animals away from human villages, as well as keeping sheep and goats together and protected from other wild animals. Offspring of captured animals never returned to the wild. Once goats and sheep were captured and their offspring were raised by humans, that is domestication. Those young animals learned that they were reliant upon humans in order to have food. This is called pastoralism. That pastoralism, we get the word pasture from its root. This is raising animals that graze grass. You are a herder, essentially. Now, you don't have very long-term reliable food source with herding. Yes, you can set some meat aside, but it's hard to set a year's worth of meat aside when you're always moving to greener pastures or better grass sources to feed your herds. So you're going to become reliant for trade on people who hunt, which this is still more secure than hunting on a daily basis. But transhuman herders and are nomads. Transhuman herders were closely affiliated with villages whose inhabitants grew grain, which required large pieces of land. These herders, the transhuman herders, would come in and they would trade meat for grain. This is a very sustainable life, and it's symbiotic for both sides of the equation. These herders produced both meat and dairy products as well as wool for textiles and exchanged these products with farmers for grain, pottery, and other staples. Transhuman herders move their livestock seasonally over short distances in order to make sure they have enough grass. Essentially, a basic model. You're going to graze in the cooler regions during the summertime where there's grass up on the hills it's a little cooler, it's a little more pleasant to be, you're going to move your pastures down to lower areas in the fall and winter where you haven't touched that grass. It's warmer to be than in the mountains, and you can feed your crops in one area all winter long. Shepherds, herdsmen that move constantly are called nomadic pastoralists or nomadic shepherds. They're going to be in the mountain and plain region called the steppes of the very northern part of this agricultural zone of southern Eurasia. They're going to domesticate horses at first. They're going to domesticate cattle much later than sheep and goats as a means for food and power. They have no fixed homes, though. They often return to the same traditional fields and pastures year after year, but it's not like they move from just one or two regions. They are constantly on a move looking for green grass and trade in order to feed their animals. They move across large stretches of land. Slide 38. Again, just another example of where the Fertile Crescent was. The first agricultural revolution is generally recognized as having gone on there. It's the first one that affected Europe. We do have evidence of other agricultural revolutions in other regions around the same time, slightly earlier. They did not actually benefit Europe, so for many years, many decades, these were not actually discussed in a Western civilization course. This region of the Levant, of the Middle East, had rich soil, it had regular rainfall, it has goats, sheep, cattle, and camels, pigs develop here naturally, and these will be domesticated. We'll also see the domestication of wild barley and wild wheat as the first human-manipulated cereal crops. Slide 38. Europe will see the advent of agriculture between 6000 and 5000 BCE. They're essentially through trade and shepherd contact, migratory contact. They're going to come to adapt technology from neighbors from Asia, from the Middle East, from the Levant. They're going to become the first evidence of settled European agriculture. As I said, will develop between 6000 and 5000 BCE in Greece and in southeastern Europe. That's the blue area on the map seen here. You go to slide 39. This is the earliest European domestic village situation that we see. We see herds coming in from the hills, brought in for trade of meat and fiber. We see cereal crops being grown to feed people. We see small villages where groups of people, probably with a common ancestor, these would be the early family clans, have grouped together for protection. They have a dog. They're trying to protect themselves from other village groups or other wild animals. This is the situation that allows humanity to thrive around the world. We have surplus food. We have protection from the elements. We have clothing. We have fire. We have control of the environment and of the animals around us. This early image of a Neolithic farm family is what the development of European culture starts from. That is one of the effects of domestication that we speak about on slide 40. People develop, because of domestication of animals, of crops, and essentially of humans. We don't have to move anymore. Our food grows right here. The meat can be found through hunting or through trade. We can live here and feed ourselves day after day, year after year. We see the creation of villages. We see a rapid increase in population because people can now generally have more children because they have more food, and they're sure that these children can survive from year after year with droughts and other problems coming into effect, obviously, but they have enough food on an annual basis to support families in a growing family structure. We see a control of nature, the development of the ideology of trade between different groups of humans. Please, however, do not think that this is a quick, immediate, rapid transition. The transition from foragers to farmers took thousands of years, and it continued to be a very fragile, vulnerable situation, honestly, until relatively recently, within the last couple of 100 years. To be brutally honest, the latter half of the 20th century is the longest period of time we have in European history where we do not have major droughts or natural disasters causing shortages of food, or where we have major wars causing a disruption in the ability to grow food and support families and village/city life. So the latter half of the 20th century, after World War II. All right. The other thing that happens because of moving into villages, because of the development of agriculture, are on slides 41 and 42. We have innovation and specialization. If you aren't out there hunting on a daily basis, you have time to mess around and do things. You can paint, you can draw, you can say, hey, this mud is sticky, and when I shape it, it holds its shape. Well, what happens if, but if it's left out in the rain, it goes away. Oh, hey, Ugg's hut burned down, but all of his clay bowls, all of a sudden, they're really awesome and really colorful and hard, and they don't melt in the rain. We've discovered pottery. Pottery gives us food dishes. Pottery gives us food and water storage. This makes it even better, even easier for long-term survival of a village or a human group. That innovation leads to craft specialization on 42. When you live in a village, not everybody needs to farm or needs to hunt. So you then have people who develop the skills to make pots, make mats, make clothing, any number of new activities that are necessary to the survival of the village or the family. Through craft specialization, we now have people within the household and the village structure creating items because they are not needed to produce food on a daily basis. We have examples here illustrated of reed weaving for baskets, clay working for pots. These are all new crafts that develop with the advent of agriculture and a sedentary lifestyle. And finally, on slide 43, the other thing that we have that develops is a concept of gender and gender stratification. Now, this is an area that new scientific evidence is challenging as well, but if you remember watching the Flintstones, Fred and Barney go to work at the quarry. They then come home and their wives have kept the house and are feeding them at the end of the day. Obviously, the Flintstones makes fun of 1950s and 1960s concepts of culture, but we do see a gender stratification of early humans during this village period based on basic biological differences. Men have skeletal structures and muscular structures that do tend to develop a little bit more strength and durability than female skeletal systems and muscular systems can develop. Gender equality because of this will erode as we shift away from hunter-gatherers. If women have traditionally gathered berries, seeds, nuts, etc., and men have hunted, in a hunter-gatherer society, both genders are working together to feed the unit as a whole. When we move to a model where men go and hunt and work in the fields, or as new scientific evidence is pointing out, women worked in the fields right along with them, field work may not seem as dangerous as hunting or meat providing, and so we see a development of a stratified society where males emerge as the dominant figure in households, in political cultures, and in other forms of early culture and cultural hierarchies, while women increasingly have to do much more difficult work. Men will use this position of power and manipulate it to give them an easier existence, shall we say, although please don't mistake me for thinking that any form of life in this period was easy. But as we understand it, we see the removal of equality for a male-dominated society once we see the rise of villages. We're still trying to understand this because not every culture developed like this. Some cultures develop matriarchies at first, where women are in powerful positions. Native Americans had a predominantly matriarchal society until they had contact with Europeans. So, not everything I'm saying is absolute. There's wiggle rooms on things, on everything I've said in this lecture and everything presented in the PowerPoints. But please, this is our first overview of humanity and the rise of humanity. I want to thank you very much for your attention today. If you have any questions over the material, please feel free to email me again at bob.welch@usd.edu. That way I can get your emails quickly and answer them as quickly as possible. The PowerPoint and the lecture will be posted as quickly as I can get them up. For your assignment this week, I will open up the discussion board. What I would like you to post to the discussion board is a one-page reflection on our lecture today. What are your thoughts on the development of hominids in human society? Is there anything I left out that you're curious about? Is there anything that you would like me to have discussed more? Does this challenge your thoughts or understandings from earlier classes of how humanity developed? Incorporate that into a one-page document, maybe a page and a half if you really get going. Post that in the new message board, and I want you to go and read other people's in the class posts, and I want you to react and discuss with at least 3 of them what they wrote, and if you agree or disagree, and don't just write, yeah, totally cool, and walk away from it. Give at least a paragraph reaction to what you read from the 3 other people that you choose to speak with in this class. So, I'll get everything taken care of as quickly as possible. I hope you have a great week. If you have any questions, please email me, and I look forward to seeing you this time, well, probably a little bit earlier next week. Have a great day.